Murdered, a podcast. I'm your host, AB. And this week on Mama Murdered, a podcast, we're diving into part 2 of the super mysterious and incredibly mind-boggling case of Cindy James. Last week, we went over the early life of Cindy's adulthood, her marriage, and eventual separation from her husband, Roy Makepeace. And then we went over how it was just a few short months after Cindy and Roy decided to do a trial run on their separation that Cindy began getting super weird phone calls, which only led to her being stalked and harassed and even physically assaulted on more than one occasion. Cindy had moved to different addresses multiple times, she'd painted her car, and she'd even changed her last name in hopes that she would eventually lose her stalker. We also went over the first 3 or so years of all of the crazy things that Cindy was living through on almost a daily basis. And we left off on the last main event being that Cindy's basement bathroom had been set on fire while she had taken her dog for a walk at 3-something in the morning. So, like most multi-part episodes, if you haven't already, then I would highly suggest going back and listening to the first part of this case, or you will have missed so much crucial information, and then this episode is not going to make a whole lot of sense to you. So, with all that being said, and without further ado, let's get it. So now we're back at Cindy's house immediately after her basement had been set ablaze, and the police have already checked the window sills for dust and smoke soot, and nothing seems to have been disturbed. Now, I mentioned the dust and the soot on the windowsill because the basement window was really the only way that the intruder would have been able to get inside while Cindy wasn't home. And there wasn't any evidence to prove that someone had come through that window to set Cindy's basement on fire. Police, however, had found some rolled up newspaper that was inside of the bathroom that had been caught on fire and had kind of just been singed, and that led police to believing that maybe Cindy had started this fire herself. And like I said last week, this fire in the basement was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back as far as police go, because the police had kind of already had their suspicions that maybe Cindy was the one doing all these things to herself, but this seemed to just be further evidence for the police this time, especially the newspapers that had been balled up and singed in the bathroom. It just didn't seem to police like there was really another option as to who could have done this, besides Cindy being the one to have done it all to herself. Now, after this fire, Cindy moved yet again. This time, she moved on December 1st, 1985, and she had once again moved into a new house just to try to avoid her stalker finding her. And I said this last week, and I will keep saying it, I will die on this hill. Cindy had to have at least believed that someone was after her. She at least had to believe that herself, or she wouldn't have been spending all this money moving from one rental to the next. She would need a security deposit. First and last month's rent, a pet deposit because she had a dog, and then she would have had to pay to have had all of her utilities switched from one place to another. She wouldn't have been going through all of this trouble and all of this money if she didn't actually believe that she was in danger. So on December 1st, 1985, Cindy moved again, and it was only about 10 days after she moved to her newest, most current address that Cindy was found laying in a ditch and partially unconscious. This all happened on December 11th, 1985, and Cindy was found in this ditch only like 5 or 6 miles away from her newest address. And again, Cindy was found with a few bruises and scrapes sporadically on her body, with the same black nylon-style piece of rope or string wrapped around her neck. This time, there were visible needle marks on her arm. Cindy was found in this ditch wearing nothing besides a man's work boot and a glove. And she had absolutely no memory of how she had ended up in this ditch or what had happened to her beforehand. But since it was December and it was cold outside, Cindy was also suffering from hypothermia. Now after this, Cindy had asked her friend Agnes to stay a few nights a week at her house with her. But it wouldn't just be Cindy and Agnes staying at Cindy's house because Agnes's husband Tom would also offer to stay a few nights a week with his wife at Cindy's house so that it wouldn't just be the two women alone. And I think that everyone was just kind of hoping that if Agnes and Tom were both at Cindy's house with her, then the attacks would stop. But that didn't seem to help either. Because in April of 1986, so 4 years into Cindy being constantly stalked and harassed, Cindy's basement was set on fire again, this time in her new house. But when this fire was set, Tom and Agnes had been staying at Cindy's house too. So here we have again more witnesses outside of just Cindy herself. And this time when the basement was set on fire, no one was actually home except for Agnes's husband, Tom. So even Cindy wasn't home when this fire was set, which makes it even harder to think that she could have been the one behind all of these things. Now, since Tom was the only one there at the time, he noticed that the basement was on fire and he tried calling the fire department, but he soon realized that the phone lines had been tampered with and cut to be disconnected, which kind of brings me to something that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, is that the phone lines were cut multiple different times throughout the times that Cindy was stalked and harassed. But why would her stalker cut the phone lines in the first place? Because then he wouldn't be able to call and threaten her anymore. I don't know, maybe this is just a scare tactic or something? But if the phone calls were truly one of the main ways that he stalked Cindy, then it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me as to why he would cut the phone lines to not be able to call and stalk her. I don't know, and this could just be me running through my thoughts out loud, but this part has never made a whole lot of sense to me with this case, especially. And at the end of this episode, I will run through all of my thoughts because I wrote them down sporadically as I thought them while I was doing this research. But for now, let's go back to the basement fire. Once Tom realized that the phone lines had been cut, he ran out of the house and to a neighbor's house to use their phone to get in touch with the fire department. And according to Tom, when he ran outside of Cindy's house to find a phone from a neighbor, Tom claims that he saw a man standing on the corner close by Cindy's house. Tom says that he asked this man to help him find somewhere to call 911 from, but according to Tom, this man didn't actually say anything, and he just kind of took off down the road instead. But at least now with Tom and Agnes staying with Cindy, we at least have a few different people that witnessed some of the things that Cindy says were happening. Like Officer McBride being there for one of the weird phone calls that Cindy got, and then Cindy's mom being there for the doorbell getting rang, and now Tom was home alone when someone set Cindy's house on fire. Which again, isn't really as strange as it sounds, just because Tom and his wife Agnes were really good friends with Cindy, so they were just staying with her in hopes that this would make her safer with two other people in the house, which obviously did not work. But my point here is that there are people besides just Cindy herself saying like, yep, I saw X, Y, and Z, or I heard this, that, and the third, or yep, I was here for this or that and actually saw this or heard that, etc., etc. Which is why this case is still so highly debated, because some people think that Cindy was behind all of these things, and other people wonder how she could have been behind it all with so many different witnesses. And then there are a camp of people who think that maybe Cindy was suffering from some kind of mental health thing, or maybe she was suffering from something that had been undiagnosed. But let's keep going because we'll get there. Now, after this second fire, Cindy was put back into a psychiatric facility for 10 weeks this time. But this isn't what you're probably thinking, because Cindy wasn't put into this facility because her doctor didn't believe her. She was actually only placed in this psychiatric facility because her doctor felt like she needed to be on suicide watch, and so that the doctor could run some tests on Cindy for multiple personality disorder, which is not what we call it now, but that's what they called it then. But those tests didn't actually point to anything regarding Cindy having any kind of multiple personality disorder. So even Cindy's doctor thought that she was telling the truth, but her doctor also thought that with everything else happening, that Cindy may have been driven to unalive herself again. And she'd already attempted this once before. So I feel like this has to say something about Cindy's version of reality, if even her doctor believed her. Now, the doctor did also say that Cindy's mental health was declining, but that they thought that it was declining because the police didn't believe what Cindy was saying. Now, Cindy was released from this 10-week stay in the psychiatric facility, and she did finally tell her friends and family that she had actually been withholding information, and that she knew who it had been who had been stalking and harassing her this whole time. Cindy claims that she couldn't tell them anything right then because her attacker had already told her before that if she said a word to anyone, that they would go after Cindy's sister and mom next. So for their sake, Cindy just promised to tell them everything once it was all said, done, and over with. And Cindy basically told her family and friends that if police weren't going to solve this, then she would solve it herself. And then she said that she'd be able to tell them everything once she had solved this big mystery about who had been stalking and harassing her. Because at this point, we're about 7 years into this, right at 7 years, and this has been happening to Cindy for so long that it wasn't even unusual for the porch lights to be busted, or for her phone lines to be cut, or even for her to be physically attacked and left laying somewhere for dead. These were all things that Cindy had just kind of started living with at this point. This was all very normal. So then on October 11th, 1988, Cindy's ex-husband, Roy Makepeace, ended up calling the police to let them know about 2 voicemails that were left on his home answering machine, which, for anyone who's never had a landline phone, an answering machine is just a voicemail for your landline phone, essentially. So Roy had gotten 2 different voicemails on his answering machine that were pretty disturbing, to say the least. And I'm going to play one of those calls for you here, but before I played them, I wanted to just tell you what they said. So, one of the voice messages that was left on Roy's answering machine was said in the creepiest, damn, graveliest, kind of raspy whisper, and all it said was Cindy, dead meat soon. And I want to go ahead and play that one now because I think this is going to be the only one that I get to play. It's the only one that I could find. So, this is the Cindy dead meat soon voice message. And I'm actually going to play this another maybe 2 times back to back. Just listen. We'll talk about it. Just listen. I know that was more than twice, but I really tried to play with the volumes to see which one you could hear better. I figured I would just leave them all in. That way, if you're listening in your car or radio or your headphones or just your phone speaker, maybe your TV, that maybe the volume difference would make a difference from where you're listening, so I just left them all in. Now, I don't know about y'all, but this dead meat soon phone call definitely sounds like a woman's voice to me, without a shadow of a doubt. But there's a lot of online forums that say that they can't tell whether it's a female's voice or a male's voice. What do y'all think? What do y'all think? Now, the second phone call, I couldn't find the actual audio for it, and the only thing I found that supposedly gives you the transcripts of what it said during the voice message was on Wikipedia. And we all know that Wiki is not a trusted source and that any Joe Smo can go onto Wiki and edit things to say whatever you want. But I'm still going to read what Wiki said that the second answering machine call said, just for shits and giggles. Now, it says, quote, "More smack, more downers, another grand after we waste the cunt, no more deal." One more time for the people in the back, or in case you're as confused as me. It says, "More smack, more downers, another grand after we waste the cunt, no more deal." And I'm just not sure what that's even supposed to mean. But regardless, Roy takes both of these phone calls straight to his lawyer so that his lawyer can give them to police, because obviously, Cindy at this point had already recovered a memory where she swears that Roy killed and dismembered 2 people on vacation, and she'd even told the police as much. So naturally, Roy doesn't want to give them any more ammunition or reason to look at him sideways. So he takes the voice recordings that were left on his answer machine to the lawyer takes them to the police. And it was only 15 days after this that Cindy was found again hogtied and unconscious in her garage. She was naked from the waist down, and of course she had the signature black nylon rope around her neck. Now, this black nylon rope seems to be at the center of every single attack that happens to Cindy. But after this, law enforcement hired a knot expert who said that they did not think it was possible for Cindy to be able to tie herself up like that. This knot expert that law enforcement hired even said that they thought that it was quote-unquote highly unlikely that Cindy could have tied herself in these knots. So this knot expert didn't say that Cindy couldn't tie these kinds of knots, but that she couldn't have tied herself into those kinds of knots. Now, after this attack, it was in January of 1985 that Cindy had an insurance salesman guy named Richard move into her basement. Cindy had actually bought a life insurance policy from this guy Richard, and she had kind of asked him to move into her basement just so she wouldn't be alone by herself in the house anymore. Richard was going to rent the basement area of Cindy's house, and things seemed to kind of calm down at least a little bit between January, when Richard moved into Cindy's basement, to April, when the next threatening thing was found. And it was on April 8th, 1989, when the security guard at the hospital where Cindy worked found another note that had been assembled from magazine cutout letters, and this note said, quote, "Soon Cindy." And then on that same night, Cindy found the words, "Sleep well," written by a fingerprint in dew on her windshield. You know, kind of like your toddler would do if it's cold and wet outside. They kind of draw on the window with their finger. That's what it was, but it said "Sleep well," and it was on Cindy's window in her car. And then again in April, on April 29th, 1989, there was another attempted break-in at Cindy's house. This time, law enforcement brought in scent dogs to track whoever had tried to break into Cindy's house, but the dogs couldn't pick up a scent or track anything. And the same thing happened in May of the same year in 1989, because in May, someone tried to break into Cindy's house again. And again, law enforcement tried to get scent dogs to track down the perpetrator, which is normally what they do. This time, though, the dogs did track the scent of someone who is still unknown over the fence of Cindy's backyard. Now, it was another 15 days after this, on May 25th, 1989, at about 4 p.m., when Cindy picked up her paycheck from the hospital where she worked. She talked to some coworkers, and everyone that saw and spoke to her said that she seemed to be in high spirits and in a good mood. Cindy had even told coworkers that she hadn't had anything crazy happen to her in a little over 2 weeks now, which I guess is about the mark when things start happening, because I've noticed that it's always about 14 or 15 days in between one thing happening when the next thing happens. So she's bragging to coworkers that nothing's happened in a little over 2 weeks, and Cindy was already supposed to be taking a 5-day leave from work when she picked her check up. So she picked her check up, she went to the grocery store, picked up some groceries, and then later that evening, Agnes and Tom had plans to go to Cindy's house for a game of bridge. Agnes and Tom showed up together at Cindy's house for their bridge game at about 10 p.m., but when Agnes and Tom got to Cindy's house, her car wasn't in the driveway. And when Agnes knocked on the front door of Cindy's house, Agnes immediately got the feeling that something was wrong. And the reason that she felt like something was wrong was because normally when they showed up at Cindy's house, Cindy would always kind of peek at them through the curtains or blinds just to, make sure it was them before she let them in. But this night, Cindy didn't do that. She didn't open the blinds or the curtains to peek out, and she didn't come to the door either. So they knocked again and again, got no answer. Now, from the way I understood it, the basement that was being rented by Richard the insurance salesman, it sounds like there was a way to get to his part of the basement without having to go all the way through Cindy's house to get there. Like maybe there was a door on the exterior of the house that led straight into the basement. And I say that because Agnes and her husband Tom walked around the outside of the house to the basement door to knock and see if maybe Richard had seen or heard from Cindy, but he hadn't seen or heard from her either. However, he did tell Agnes and Tom that Cindy said that she may go do some shopping. So from here, Agnes and Tom stopped by the Blundell Shopping Center which is a shopping center that Cindy shopped at pretty often, which actually seems like a pretty good idea, because when they pulled in the shopping center parking lot, Agnes and Tom spotted Cindy's car in a parking spot close by the bank that Cindy usually used. And although Cindy's car was in the parking lot, Cindy was nowhere to be found. So Agnes and Tom headed straight to the police station. Now, mind you, Cindy has only been missing for a couple of hours at this point, presumably anyways. But with the lengthy rap sheet of reports that Cindy has made and the police knowing her situation as good as they did, the police immediately went out to the shopping center where Agnes and Tom had found Cindy's car parked. And when they got there, they looked around using their flashlights, and that's when an officer spotted what looked like blood on the driver's side door, which of course was reason enough for this officer to go ahead and call for backup. The officer who initially responded also took note of the groceries that were still in the bags inside of the car, along with Cindy's purse and a wrapped birthday gift. Now, after examining Cindy's purse, it was obvious that Cindy's wallet wasn't inside the purse. And when the officers looked around a little bit further, they found Cindy's wallet along with her debit card and a bank deposit slip that were all underneath Cindy's car. So the groceries in the car are still there. There's a wrapped birthday gift that was still there. This just makes me believe that Cindy was going somewhere and she was stopped by somebody. And then her wallet, bank card, and deposit slip being found underneath Cindy's car again makes me think that Cindy was just going about her day-to-day task when she was stopped by someone or something. But the bank card, the wallet, and the deposit slip almost looked like they had kind of been sat on the ground versus being dropped and scattered about underneath the car. And then after looking around Cindy's car in the parking lot for a bit, police head over to Cindy's house at about 1 a.m.-ish on the morning of May 26th. And they went ahead and went inside. Once the police got inside of Cindy's house, everything looked relatively normal at first glance. There was a deck of cards still sitting on the table, just like they would have been on any other regular night that she had planned to play bridge with Agnes and Tom. And one thing that did seem out of place was the fact that Cindy's blinds over her windows had been left open, and Cindy always kept her blinds closed. For obvious reasons, she is being openly stalked. I would imagine they are always closed. And it was only a few hours later, at about 3 a.m., when police went ahead to Roy Makepeace's house, just to kind of get his statement and his whereabouts for the day before. But remember, this was really just 3 a.m. in the morning after Cindy had last been seen, so just midnight that night would have obviously technically made it the next day. So when officers asked Roy where he had been on the day that Cindy was last seen, Roy told them that he'd been at a food market with a friend, that after he and this friend left the food market that they went out and got dinner together, and then Roy says that he went back to his friend's house where he installed a stereo system for her. He says that he left her house at about 11:30 p.m. and that he'd gotten home sometime shortly after midnight. Now, the friend that Roy had been with did back up and corroborate everything he said happened, so seems like a pretty tight alibi. And after the police had gone through the things inside of Cindy's car, they were able to find a time-stamped receipt for 12:43 p.m. on the day that she was last seen. And the receipt was for a few different things, including the wrapping paper and the birthday gift that was found already wrapped and inside of Cindy's car still. But there was also another receipt found that was also time-stamped for 7:58 p.m. on the same day that she was last seen, and this receipt was from the deposit that Cindy had made to her bank. Now, police did pull files to be able to interview people who had used the ATM within a 15-minute time period before or after Cindy at the bank. And doing this led investigators to a woman that used the ATM at about 8 p.m. on the same day that Cindy had last been seen, and shortly after Cindy had deposited the money into her own banking account. This woman did remember seeing a blonde-haired woman who she said had almost run into her own car, and that the blonde-haired lady was speeding through the parking lot wearing a pink shirt. But when she was shown a picture of Cindy, this lady wasn't able to say for certain if the woman who had been speeding through the parking lot was actually Cindy or not. And then there was another man who had used the same ATM shortly after 8 p.m. who says that he saw a blonde-haired lady walking through the parking lot. He says that he did watch her walk around for a few minutes before he left, But then when police showed this man a picture of Cindy, he also wasn't able to say for certain that this was the same woman that he'd seen walking around the parking lot. So 2 different witnesses, both who said that they saw a blonde-haired woman, which, if I haven't mentioned already, Cindy was blonde, and they both saw this woman doing some kind of questionable things, but they also weren't watching her closely enough to be able to say for sure if it was Cindy just from being shown a picture of Cindy. So if this woman that both witnesses saw was Cindy, then what the hell was she doing? Why was she speeding through the parking lot? Why did she almost hit this random lady's car? And then why was she walking around the parking lot aimlessly on her feet, like on foot? It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Now, for the next few days, police looked through bodies of water, and they really did, they were on the prowl looking for Cindy. But a few days after Cindy had been reported missing, the insurance salesman Richard, who had been renting out Cindy's basement, well, he called the police to let them know that the insurance company that he worked for had gotten a call regarding Cindy's life insurance policy, and that the man on the phone asking about Cindy's life insurance policy claimed to be Cindy's dad, Otto. But when Cindy's dad, Otto, was asked about this, he claimed that he never made that call. So this makes me wonder if the caller who had called about Cindy's life insurance policy had some kind of thick South African accent, the same kind of accent that Cindy's ex-husband Roy would have had, because if we knew that, then it would at least clear up this part of the questions I have. We would at least be able to assume some things. Hell, we can't even make assumptions with the bits of information that we get in this case. So for the next 2 weeks after Cindy was reported missing, there was absolutely nothing found to point to where she was or what had happened to her. That is until June 8th, 1989, when a road worker or construction worker of some kind, a man named Gordon, found Cindy's deceased body in the backyard of an abandoned house. Now, this abandoned house was only about a mile or so from the shopping center where Cindy's car had been found in the parking lot. So whatever happened to Cindy, it didn't seem like she ever made it very far from the shopping center where her car was found. She was laying in the fetal position, and she was hogtied, with, of course, this same black nylon rope wrapped around her neck. And most of the time when Cindy was found tied up like this before, the knots were always tied in a way that kind of suggests that whoever had tied them didn't intend on keeping Cindy in that position for very long. Like the knots were always kind of loose and not really restrictive. But this time was different. This time the knots were tied extremely tight in a way to suggest that whoever had tied her up didn't have plans on letting her leave. And then there was spray paint. Cindy's deceased body had been circled with orange spray paint, and from the circle around her body was a line of orange spray paint leading to a fuel tank of this abandoned house. Now, on this exterior fuel tank was a message sprayed in the same orange spray paint, and it read, quote, "Some bitch died here." So now we have this ominous spray paint message that literally draws a line from this fuel tank to Cindy's body, saying that she'd passed away there. Which makes me wonder how no one saw this spray painting being done, because this abandoned house where Cindy was found was on a stretch of road that was pretty heavily trafficked on foot by residents in the area. It was also right near a pretty busy intersection. So how did no one see someone walking around with a can of spray paint spraying on shit? I don't know, it just seems unlikely to me that no one saw this. But let's keep going, because Cindy's autopsy was done, and that's when it was found that Cindy had died from an overdose. Now, this wasn't just an overdose of one thing. Cindy had morphine, Xanax, and Valium that was found in her system. It was found that there was about 10 times more morphine in her bloodstream than what would have been needed to be lethal. Police seemed to be immediately under the impression that this was either a suicide or an accident. And they were thinking that if Cindy had been the one making all this up the whole time, then she could have accidentally overdosed and died before someone was able to find her and save her this time. So their thinking was, if she had been doing this to herself the whole time, every time she'd done this before, she had been found dazed and confused, but saved. Maybe this time she had taken a little bit too much, no one had found her to save her, and then she accidentally died. But the private investigator that Cindy had hired, Ozzy, he also went to take a look at Cindy's body after the autopsy was done, and he believes that Cindy was actually murdered somewhere else, and that her body was then dumped behind this abandoned house. And things basically stayed a mystery from here, until May of 1990, when an inquest into Cindy's death was done. And I've tried to, word what an inquest into death is in a way that makes sense, but I failed drastically at that. So I pulled this verbatim from rwkgoodman.com to explain it in a way that hopefully everybody will understand, because I would have never been able to explain it like this. So this website explains an inquest into death word for word. And it says, quote, "An inquest is a coroner's investigation to seek out and record the facts concerning a death. The purpose of an inquest is to discern answers of 4 questions. Who the deceased was, as well as where, when, and how they died. A coroner will lead their investigation, culminating in an inquest hearing. In the majority of cases, the coroner determines the conclusions themselves after hearing evidence. However, in some circumstances, the inquest will be heard by a jury, who are then responsible for determining the conclusion into the inquest. So basically, if the coroner can't make their mind up on the cause of death, then they can bring in a jury to hear the evidence and come to a conclusion instead. And that's what ended up happening in Cindy's case. They brought a jury in to decide the cause of death, and still, even after bringing a jury into it, the jury could not decide if Cindy's death had been suicide, homicide, or accidental. And it was decided that Cindy had died from a quote-unquote unknown event after this ruling. After this, Cindy James's case was formally and officially closed, and I feel like with all the reports that Cindy had made and all the things that she had gone through, this really put a damper on being able to determine her cause of death. I kind of feel like those things just eventually made it where no one believed what Cindy was saying, whether it was happening to her or not, which is extremely sad if these things were actually happening to her, and even in death, she wasn't believed. In the amount of drugs in her system, it was found that the morphine wasn't injected into Cindy, but it was taken by mouth in pill form, which would have given her about 15 minutes to tie herself up and do all these other things if she had done this to herself. But I just keep coming back to Cindy always being found hogtied. I could not imagine a world where I could figure out how to hogtie myself. You know what I mean? And then another thing that I always think of is that Cindy worked at a hospital, so I feel like she could have possibly had access to all these drugs that were found in her system. But I haven't seen anything that says that a bunch of drugs were missing from the hospital when she worked there. And that is basically the conclusion of this case, except for my extremely random thoughts that are not in any particular order that I just felt like sharing. Okay, obvious choice number 1 is the husband, because it's always the freaking husband. But Roy had an alibi. And if Roy Makepeace didn't do all these things himself, like maybe he had help, he was well off, he also had the means, the motive, and the opportunity to do so. Maybe this was his way of trying to scare Cindy, hoping that maybe she would come back home to him, almost making her believe that she couldn't live without a big, strong man in the same house as her. Trying to scare her back into his arms. Like I said, these are all super random, in no particular order. I just jotted them down as I thought them. Another theory that I think is plausible about Roy is the claim that Cindy made during hypnosis, where she claimed that she watched Roy murder and dismember 2 people on vacation. What if, since Cindy did believe that Roy was behind some of the things that happened to her, that she decided before she went under hypnosis that she was going to make this story up about Roy murdering 2 people to try to get him locked up so some of these things would stop? What if she made that entire story up as a way to get back at Roy, because she did say on more than one occasion that she thought that Roy could have been responsible for at least some of the things happening to her? So what if she didn't actually uncover this memory in hypnosis, and she made it up before she went in to try to get him arrested, hoping that maybe whatever his part in this was, it would stop? I don't know. Again, a random thought. My next random thought was that maybe Cindy was suffering from some sort of mental illness where she was experiencing audible or even visual hallucinations, like possibly schizophrenic or bipolar schizophrenic, where when she answered the phone, she did actually hear someone, but that was just an audible hallucination. That still wouldn't explain all the letters that the Canadian police have pictures of, but it's definitely still an option to explain some of the things that Cindy was seeing, hearing, and feeling that no one else seemed to be able to hear, see, or feel. But then you have to keep in mind that Cindy worked at a hospital. So she worked around people who are trained in mental health. She worked with them every single day for more than a decade. And no one ever noticed or recalled anything to indicate that Cindy may have been struggling with some kind of undiagnosed mental health issues. But have you seen the girl on TikTok? Her and her husband are schizophrenic and she works at Publix. She has handed a visual hallucination of a person a cookie before. She has stopped and helped customers who are asking her where stuff is, only to snap out of the hallucination and realize she's been standing on aisle 7 talking to herself. I'm just wondering if that might explain some of the things that happened to Cindy. Maybe not all of them, but some of them. Okay, next random thought. Cindy's first fiance, who was still unnamed, and he supposedly killed himself during the ski trip, but none of Cindy's family or friends had ever met, seen, or spoken to this guy. So this little bit of information makes it easier for a lot of people that believe that Cindy was behind all these things. Like, it would give them something to say, like, okay, this man probably never existed, and it was probably just a figment of Cindy's imagination. So what makes this stalking and harassment claims any different? This unnamed fiancé just adds fuel to the fire on the belief that Cindy was doing all this to herself and that there was no stalker, in my opinion. And then that thought just brings me to my next thought, which makes me think that there could even be a situation where Cindy was doing some of these things to herself, and then maybe Roy Makepeace was, responsible for some of the things, and then maybe even Officer Patrick McBride was involved in some of these things. Like, maybe they were all three doing a little bit of something and not knowing the other was doing it, and then all that just kind of threw a wrench into Cindy's already flawed plan? I don't know. Okay, my next thought. In one of the first calls that Cindy reported that the unknown caller spoke to her on, was the call where they used her nickname instead of her legal name that they would have found in the phone book or by calling the operator to get someone's phone number. So this would have been someone that she was close enough to know that she didn't actually go by the name Cynthia. Which, that just makes me wonder if it's someone that Cindy knew, like maybe a coworker or even a previous coworker, or whoever rang up her groceries every week, or whoever she dealt with at the bank when she went. Just someone who knew enough about Cindy to be able to scare the ever-living shit out of her. But then would Cindy feel comfortable enough to tell the bank teller or the guy bagging her groceries that she was moving to a different address, or that she was having her phone number switched again? Because I doubt it. And then I'd really like to know if the calls that were made to Cindy's job, if they were made when she was on shift, or if it was happening only on the days that she was off. Because if the calls were only being made to the hospital where she worked on the days that she was off, then we could easily assume that she was the one making the calls. But if you just, for instance, if Cindy was standing at the corner talking to somebody at the counter, and the phone rang, and whoever Cindy was standing next to happened to be the one who answered it, then we can kind of assume that maybe those calls weren't made by Cindy. But we don't ever get that clarity, which is really annoying. And then kind of the same thing with the fires being set, because, okay, the first fire. We know that Cindy was walking her dog at 3-something in the morning, alone, obviously, when the fire happened. But then the next fire that was set, it was set when Agnes's husband Tom was home alone at Cindy's house. Okay, then that raises a whole nother slew of questions for me. Like, where were Cindy and Agnes when this fire was set that only Tom was home for? Were they at work? Or were they just out shopping? Because that seems like it would make a big difference to me as far as what I think happened. Which, then that just led me down an entirely different rabbit hole that I found, where there are people that think that Tom and Agnes being there for a lot of the things that happen they maybe think that they were the ones that were tormenting Cindy this whole time. Which, if that is the case, then why in the hell has Lifetime not picked up and written a movie about this case yet? But this fire, where Tom was the only one home, this is something that the camp of people who think that Tom and Agnes are the ones responsible, this fire is one of the biggest things that they point to as to why they think Tom and Agnes were involved. It's also kind of shady that they show up to Cindy's house to play bridge and immediately find her car, first try, without even guessing, and the parking lot. One more thing that I found on this rabbit hole of Tom and Agnes maybe being the ones responsible is that Agnes also worked at the hospital with Cindy, so she would have also had access to the drugs that were found in Cindy's body when the autopsy was done. I just can't find a motive for Tom and Agnes to be responsible. Like, I can't come up with a why for them to be involved. Some of it makes sense, but still, why? Like, what's the motive behind it? Now, something else that I don't remember if I even mentioned yet or not, but Cindy was given 2 separate polygraph tests about the things that were happening to her long before her death. And both times, the results were inconclusive, which that just led investigators to believe that Cindy was likely hiding something. And Cindy's mom, Matilda, does say that Cindy told her that the attacker had told Cindy during one of the physical attacks that if she spoke a word to anyone about the things that were happening, that he would go after Cindy's mom and sister next. So this made Cindy's mom believe that Cindy was purposely hiding things from the investigators. That maybe Cindy wasn't necessarily lying per se, but that she also wasn't giving them every piece of information that she had in order to keep her mom and sister safe. And then a lot of people point to the fact that police had put surveillance teams outside of Cindy's house on multiple different occasions. And that when police were there, nothing ever seemed to happen, which is true. Nothing ever did happen when police were staking out Cindy's house. But, in that same breath, if someone was stalking Cindy in the way that she says that they were, then don't you think that they would have known when police were outside standing watching their patrol cars? Like, of course they would. And that's like Cindy's mom said on the episode of Unsolved Mysteries that aired about Cindy's case. Cindy's mom basically said, like, of course they weren't dumb enough to try anything with police officers sitting right outside of her house. And that makes sense, especially if they were stalking her on the level that she claims. But then this brings back the people who think that Agnes and her husband Tom were somehow involved, because they were probably Cindy's closest and most trusted friends. So they would have probably been the first ones that Cindy would tell if police were coming out to do surveillance on her house. Essentially, the people that think that Tom and Agnes are somehow involved think that they would have known when police would be at Cindy's house doing surveillance and when police wouldn't be there at all, which is another pretty valid point. Cindy probably would have told them, oh my gosh, they're finally doing surveillance this week on the house, and if they were involved, then of course they would know not to try anything then. But one thing that I cannot seem to let go of with this case is the amount of time, money, energy, and effort that was put into investigating Cindy's case. It kind of makes me believe that it would have had to have been Cindy doing all this to herself, or else the police would have found somebody to say for sure, this is the person who's been terrorizing Cindy. They just put so much time and effort into this investigation, like $1.5 million worth of money, just in this investigation. Surely that would have led to a suspect. Any suspect. But it never did. Now, I'm sure some of y'all were wondering where Officer Patrick McBride was during part 2 of this case, and oddly enough, he was later arrested after Cindy's death for sexually assaulting 2 different women. So is that another suspect? Because it sounds like it. And he would have been a police officer, so he would have had inside information as to when they were doing surveillance and what was going on and what they had found and what they hadn't. I don't know. But if you go Google pictures of Cindy from the time that the stalking and harassment and physical attacks started happening to the last few pictures of Cindy before her death, you can see a visible difference in the way she looks. I mean, it looks like these things put Cindy through enough emotional stress that she was aging overnight. That had to have been real for her on some level. even after all this, I still don't know what I think. What do y'all think? What do y'all think? That's my question. If you're on Spotify, you can leave it in the question box under this episode, and I will publish them so everybody can go read them. On that note, y'all, I gotta go start Thanksgiving dinner because it is officially Tuesday, and that means it's that time. So I hope everybody has a great Thanksgiving. Eat lots of food. Don't experiment with new recipes. This is not the time. Before I sign off, let's do a review of the week. And this review is from December of 2022, so almost a year, and it's from another true crime podcast, which I also listen to, so you should also go listen to them. It's Tell Me a True Crime Story podcast. This review says, I love AB. Just discovered this podcast, and I'm loving it so far. I plan to listen to all the episodes. I love AB's accent and how she delivers the stories. The hard work she puts into each episode is evident, and she consistently pumps out the episodes. You're my favorite human alive. I love you so much. Seriously, go check out that podcast. It's awesome. I gotta go cook, y'all, because I got some stomachs that need filling in this house this week. And so do you. So let's do it again. Same time, same place, next Wednesday. See you then.
That's how my mama murdered a podcast.